In front of the entire village, Okon did something no one had ever dared to do. He refused the chief's offer of a new wife. A silence fell over the crowd. Heavy, suffocating. Eyes widened. Okon stood still, calm on the outside, but inside, his heart pounded like a drum of war. He knew his people. He knew their traditions. And he knew this would not end well. The chief and the elders stared at him, stunned, not just shocked, but offended. Who had Okon become? How could a son of the soil defy them? Within minutes, their decision was made. They grabbed him roughly, dragged him toward his cottage, and demanded that he leave the village immediately. With Mabel inside, Mabel waited, bags packed. She had accepted her fate. The door finally opened, and she looked at him, straight in the eye, bracing herself for the final moment. But what she saw confused her. Okon didn't come to her. He walked past her, straight into the bedroom. She followed, slowly, unsure, afraid. She saw him packing, quickly, silently, urgently. Moments later, he picked up his bags and beckoned to her to follow him. They both left the village, Okon leading the way. He was no longer anxious. He was now furious. How dare they treat him like this? How dare they think they could choose for him? He was a man, not a child, and he was done with tradition. As far as Okon was concerned, tradition had made his people cold, heartless, and unjust. He and Mabel walked and walked until they reached the edge of the forest, the place everyone feared. And there, they stopped. Mabel turned to him. She didn't have to ask. He told her everything, every moment, every word. And when he finished, she broke down, not in pain, but in joy. He had chosen her. When it mattered most, he chose her. They had lost their home, their comfort, their place in the village, but they had not lost each other, and that was comforting. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Okon built a small cabin from sticks around the forest. Mabel baked bread over a wood fire. They planted a small garden. The sight of the forest so close was scary and intimidating. But every day, they prayed and encouraged each other. One evening, as they were lying in their hut, Okon heard a rustle outside. He looked questioningly at Mabel. She nodded her head, indicating that she too had heard it. They grew silent, listening, and then they heard it again, this time louder, closer. There was a soft tap on the door, followed by a snuffle. Okon inched toward the door and opened it slightly, lamp in hand. And there, huddled close to their hut, was Oedimi, eyes wide with fear. Okon quickly brought him into the cabin. He was shivering, and looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Mabel gave him a warm blanket and a simple meal. He devoured it and slept off immediately after. Okon and Mabel looked at him, wondering what brought him so far away from the village at that time of night. Where was his grandmother, and how did he find them? Oedimi slept through the night but woke at the crack of dawn. He was used to waking up early. Took him a minute to remember where he was. He looked at Okon and Mabel with a sad expression. He told them that his grandmother had passed, and the villagers had taken her body away. He was left alone in the hut. No one had spoken to him since, but he'd seen Okon and Mabel carry their bags months ago. He and his grandmother had traced them to the hut one evening. and she'd told him to go look for them, should anything happen to her, that they were kind people and wouldn't turn him away. But she had also written a letter to Okon and Mabel. Owodimi produced a soiled piece of paper that he'd kept for months. And now he looked at them with tears in his eyes as he handed them the piece of paper. Okon and Mabel read the letter. His grandmother mentioned the fact that she'd heard what had happened to them. She thought it was cruel of the village to treat them the way they did. She mentioned that her health was failing, and it broke her heart that Owodimi would be left with no one. She asked if Okon and Mabel could take care of him, if they could find it in their hearts to love him as their own. Okon and Mabel looked at each other. Then everything went quiet. They had spent years asking God for a child, waiting, believing, hoping, and it seemed as if their prayers had been overlooked. But now, in this moment, Okon and Mabel realized that God's plan was different from theirs. He sent them a child, one who had suffered, who never felt the warm embrace of a mother, nor the admiration of a father. A child who needed love. A child who needed them. Okon and Mabel could not hold back the tears. It was as if God had prepared their hearts to accept Owodimi. As the weeks passed, they developed a strong bond. Okon and Mabel grew to love Owodimi like their very own. And Owodimi adored them. He worked in the garden beside Okon, while Mabel baked over the fireside. And some days he followed Mabel to the market to help her sell bread. And despite their situation, for the first time in years, their home felt complete. Years passed. Okon and Mabel grew older. Living without the convenience they enjoyed back in the village took a toll on them. Getting simple chores done had become laborious and had impacted their physical health. As time went by, Mabel fell ill and could no longer bake bread. Owodimi and Okon worked tirelessly in the garden, in order to produce enough food to consume as well as sell. Every Saturday morning, Okon and Owodimi sold vegetables at the market. But because the garden was small, the weekly harvest could no longer sustain them. Mabel's condition worsened. Okon and Owodimi became increasingly worried. Owodimi told Okon about the herbalist he'd seen while selling at the city market. The problem was, there was not enough money to buy the herbs. Okon grew worried, but Owodimi stood strong. He assured Okon that he had a solution. They woke early the next morning to check on Mabel, like they always did. Her health was deteriorating. Owodimi hurried outside to the garden and picked the last of the tomatoes they had left. He told Okon to stay with Mabel while he rushed off to the market to sell the tomatoes. The more he thought of Mabel, the faster he walked. He had grown up to be very caring and extremely protective of Okon and Mabel. He couldn't stand the thought of losing either of them. They were his gift from God. And though he was terrified of Mabel's condition, he didn't let it show. He felt the need to be strong for Okon. 45 minutes later, Owodimi was at the market. But things didn't go as planned. Sales were difficult. Most people preferred to buy from the vendors that had a lot more produce. After 1 hour with no sales, he began to panic. He had to do something. Without thinking, he picked up his basket of tomatoes and headed straight over to the herbalist, prepared to offer them in exchange for the herbs. Not that the woman needed them. She looked wealthy, but that was what he had. And time was running out. As Owodimi approached the herbalist, he was met with a crowd of people. He waited, embarrassed at his means of exchange. Thankfully, The crowd dwindled and Oedeme grasped the opportunity to explain his situation. She looked at him, puzzled, but with admiration. She was deeply moved by the lengths he would go to for his mother. She allowed him to keep the tomatoes and gave him the herbs without charge. But she went on to say something that shook him. She said that in just 2 weeks, she would be gone from the market, gone from the village, and gone from the country entirely. Oedeme had hoped to keep buying herbs from her until Mabel was fully recovered. Now he wondered who he would turn to in her absence. But he had no time to process what she just told him. He was pressed for time. So he thanked her and sped off. But 5 minutes later he stopped, abruptly, because a thought popped into his head. A wild thought, one that he knew Okon and Mabel would not approve of. Oedeme thought to himself, the long path home would take 45 minutes. But the forest would take only 15 minutes. The same forest everyone feared. The same forest no one entered. He himself had never ventured in. But having lived that close to it for so many years, he had observed the terrain and memorized the landscape. It was his backyard. His eyes had trailed the various canopies a million times. And to date, no evil spirit had disturbed them. Maybe the spirits had grown to like them, he thought. He stood still for a moment, trying to decide, looking at the safe but long path ahead of him, and then at the short but dangerous one beside him. He imagined Mabel, laying on the bed, eyes closed. What if she couldn't hold on any longer? What if? The thought haunted him. He shook his head vigorously, as if, in so doing, his fears would vanish. And that was when he found himself moving slowly toward the edge of the forest. But the closer he got, the darker and eerier it appeared. Perhaps I should turn around, he thought to himself, and he tried to, but something strong, something powerful, began pulling him in, and he couldn't stop himself.